seated.
The reading today is Ephesians 5:15 and 16. Therefore be careful how you walk, not as unwise men, but as wise, making the most of your time, because the days are evil.
Good morning. I got to say, one of the things I enjoy the most about preaching is getting to stand up here and look at all of you. Not because you're just so good looking either, but it's because when you're sitting out there, everyone's kind of looking one direction. You're all seeing the same thing. But from up here, I can see one of you. I know who's having a rough morning with the kids, and I know who's dozing off during the sermon, and I know when a particular point impacts you differently, or when you have questions, or you look curious, because I have this perspective. Perspective is the framework through which we view life. It is the framework through which we approach life. Our perspective dictates what kind of employees we're going to be, how we're going to interact with our coworkers and our boss. It dictates what kind of parents we're going to be and how we raise our kids. It determines how we're going to interact with our spouses and navigate the ups and downs of marriage. And our perspective is the framework through which we view our relationship with God as well. Perspective is a very important fundamental part of how we live. So the question we can ask, what would happen if we changed our perspective? I've never been this tall in my life. Now, I've changed my perspective. I'm seeing things that I haven't seen before, different ways. I can see who's playing on their phone now during the sermon. I can see things a little differently. And you are seeing something a little differently now. You're having to adjust in your seat. Changing perspective can kind of be disorienting. It can be a little uncomfortable at times. It can challenge us and takes time to orient ourselves to a new perspective. There was an experiment done in 1970 by a Stanford psychologist named Walter Mischel. Walter Mischel did this experiment. We call it the marshmallow experiment. You may have heard of it. He took these preschool-age children into a room and he gave them each a marshmallow. And he said to them, this is your marshmallow. You can do whatever you want with it. You can eat it right now if you want to. But I'm going to leave the room for about 15 minutes. When I come back, if you haven't eaten your marshmallow, then you're going to get a second marshmallow. Now, some of the kids predictably gobbled the marshmallow up almost immediately. And some of them sat there kind of white-knuckling the next 15 minutes, just trying their dead level best to not eat that marshmallow, staring at it until they couldn't contain themselves anymore. And this research team was observing some of the kids that didn't eat the marshmallow and how they accomplished that. Some of them started making up little games to play with themselves. And some of them started singing songs to themselves to distract their minds from the temptation that was before them. And there were a certain number of the kids that literally just laid down and took a nap, just to avoid the temptation. This was a study on the power of delayed gratification, and that experiment has been replicated many, many times over the years. Some long-term studies have been done to track the children involved in the experiment throughout their life and see how that skill of delaying gratification impacted their later life. And it's very evident. The ability to delay gratification statistically shows markers for improved health and wellness outcomes. It shows markers for improved socioeconomic outcomes, and it shows markers for improved academic outcomes. Delayed gratification is a great way to live your life. But sometimes that is the perspective through which we view our spiritual life. God placed us in this world. There are things set before us, all manner of wonderful things. They look good, they sound good, they feel good. And God says, it's your life. You have free will. You can indulge yourself in all of these things if you want to. But you choose to be in Jesus Christ and choose to follow him, some of these things are not on the menu for you anymore. And if you can avoid those things till I come back, there is a better reward waiting for you. Everything I've just said, by the way, is factually true, it's spiritually true, it's scripturally true. Delayed gratification is a part of how we live our life spiritually. But is it the only framework through which we live, and how does that framework affect the way we choose to live? Are we trying to white-knuckle our way through life and stare at these things in the world that seem appealing to us but we're not allowed to have? Are we distracting ourselves with games and songs and maybe even just laying down and taking a spiritual nap? And is that the right framework to have day-to-day life of a Christian? Or do we need to adjust our perspective? There is a cliche, the only thing in life that's assured is death and taxes. I had a professor in college that used to say the human condition is terminal, meaning we're all going to die, right? We all have an end point. We all have an expiration date. And how do we choose to live knowing that we have an expiration date? Well, what we do is we try to mitigate that expiration date. We try to eat healthy. We try to exercise. We avoid risky activities and behaviors. We wear our seatbelts. We drive the speed limit. We consult doctors. We take medication. All of these things, not to help us live forever because we know that's not possible, but just simply to gain some control over when that end is going to come. Have you ever met someone that knew when their end was going to come? Maybe you know someone that was born with a medical condition that significantly impacts or limits their life expectancy. Or maybe you've known someone who was terminally ill, and they had a rough idea of when their day was coming. I've known several people in that circumstance. Had a friend from college who just passed away this past year, within the last year. And she battled cancer for several years, on and off. And in the last months, the last year of her life roughly, I was able to follow along on social media as she traveled all over the world, going on all these trips that she probably never would have gone on had she not known that her end was near. And you might have known someone that decided to go, bungee jumping or racing motorcycles, or suddenly they just live differently because they know when the time ends. Why do people who know their end date live differently than the rest of us who don't? It is a question of perspective. You see, it's not simply the knowledge that our days are limited and therefore have greater value that leads us to live differently, because all of us know that our days are limited. It's just that when we know our days are limited, but we don't know exactly how limited they are, we weigh everything in this balance of risk and benefit. But those who know the end of their story, who know some specifics about the timing and the means of the end of their story, they live like crazy people, because that knowledge has given them permission to be radical. That perspective, that framework gives them permission not to be not fearful of death. It's not that they're not afraid of death, it's that they're no longer afraid of life. And so they live differently. It's all about perspective. Paul writes in two different places, one of the verses we read this morning, and it's Ephesians chapter 5, verse 15 and 16. He says, therefore, he says this also in Colossians chapter 4, verse 5. It basically says the same thing. He says, be careful how you walk, not as unwise men, but as wise, making the most of your time, because the days are evil. In Colossians, it says effectively the same thing. Be careful how you live the right way, live a righteous life, and make the most of your time. Exagorazo is the Greek word that is translated as make the most of your time. That's a pretty good, accurate translation, but the literal translation is the word redeem. Some of your translations, if you have a New King James Version or something like that, it'll say redeem the time. Redeeming the time. What in the world does that mean? That's the word that's used to describe what happens to us because of the blood of Christ. We're redeemed. We sing the songs about it. Redeemed, how I love to proclaim it. Redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. I'm redeemed by love divine. Glory, glory, Christ is mine, Christ. We're redeemed. How are we redeemed, and what does it mean to redeem the time? Well, it's really a word from the field of economics. So before all of your eyes glaze over, we're going to do a real quick macroeconomics 101, okay? Everything has value. Everything in this world has value. Now, I'm not talking about price. Value is a component of price, but everything has inherent value. And that value is determined by a number of things. One of those things is usefulness, or what we call utility. Not everything is useful to everybody. Some things are more useful to one person or another. And things are scarce. All of these items that have value, they're scarce. There's not enough of everything for everyone. So we have scarcity, we have usefulness. Those things are components of how we define value, and that means there is a constant exchange of values and a constant surplus and deficit that is trying to be balanced. Here's an example. The farmer has a lot of corn. Farmer has a lot of corn. Now, some of that corn is valuable because he can eat it. It has inherent value as food, so the farmer can eat it. But for every ear of corn, beyond what the farmer can consume, it has less and less what we call marginal value. So he's got all this corn, and it gets less and less valuable the more he has of it. Now, on the other side of town, there's a doctor. The doctor's made quite a bit of money practicing medicine, and he's got money. You can't eat money. So every additional dollar that the doctor earns is less and less valuable. Now, how do we mitigate this inequity in the balance of dollars with less value and corn with less value? Well, of course, the farmer exchanges the corn that he doesn't need for the money that he wants, that he can use, and now everyone's got corn, everyone's got money, and the exchanges go on and on and on, exchanging value for value. That is the concept of redemption. We redeem a ticket for admission. We redeem a coupon for a discount. We redeem cold, hard cash for goods and services. To redeem is to exchange value. To exchange something for value, or to give something value, because what is the value of an item? It's what someone is willing to give in exchange for it. It's how we determine value. So if we are redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, that is Christ exchanging his life for our life, and that assigns the value of our soul. It's what it means to be redeemed. God exchanged for value through Christ. Now, applying that same concept, because we've got the same word, exagorazo, to Paul's writings in Ephesians and Colossians, he is saying, live right, make the most of the time, redeem the time. You have a limited number of days. You have a limited number of days, and you need to exchange it for value. Back to the example we had about the terminally ill person who lives differently. Why don't we live that way as Christians? I mean, they know the end of their story. That's why they have this permission to be radical. But don't we know the end of our story? I mean, we don't know when we're going to die. We don't know how many days we have left to live. But I do know that when that end comes, I've been redeemed, and therefore I have permission to be radical in redeeming the days I have left. I have permission to go a little crazy. I don't have to be fearful of life anymore. There was another study that was conducted, another experiment on children. We like to experiment on children. It's half of what parenting is. They built a playground. Some landscape architects, actually. They built this playground, and they put the nicest, newest playground equipment out here, and they spread it evenly over the entire area of the playground. But the one thing they didn't put on the playground was a fence. They didn't build a fence around it. And they released the children out into the playground. And what did the children do? Did they just run off? Who knows where? No. They all gathered right around one or two pieces of playground equipment right in the middle, and that's where they stayed. They didn't even go and look at the other stuff that was there to play with on the playground. They just stayed right there in the middle because there was no boundary. There was no security. There was no sense of where things stop and where things begin. But when they redid the experiment and put the fence up, the kids were all over the place. They were all the way out to the very edge, playing on the slides and on the swings over here, and they scattered and they found joy and creativity and curiosity because they had boundaries in which to work. Certainly, the Christian life does involve boundaries. There are things that are not on the menu. We are called to live righteous lives in view of the redeeming blood of Jesus Christ. But when our perspective is simply that life is about avoiding the bad things and making it to the delayed gratification, what we lose sight of is that those boundaries have given us a freedom. Because we have been redeemed, because we live righteous lives, because we are called to a higher way of living, we are also called to redeem the days, to explore, to push, to go out and be creative and be joyful because we have work to do in this life. Our perspective as Christians ought not to simply be that we are delaying gratification to get to heaven. It ought to be realizing the freedom that we have because we know the end of the story. And knowing the end of the story means we don't have to be fearful about living radically. We have permission to go a little crazy. And what does that mean? That means that we live life with a perspective of radical evangelism. We don't just sit and play games and sing songs and take naps to try and avoid the pitfalls of the world. We rise above that. We follow Christ, and we look at every individual that enters and exits from our life as a soul that needs Jesus. It means we're radical in the way we serve people, the way we look to help those in need, the way we look to lift up those who suffer. It means we're radical, yes, in our abstinence of avoiding the things in life that are not a part of righteous living. What Paul is getting at with these verses, that you ought to live a righteous life, but not simply to attain the reward that we have delayed for ourselves or that God has delayed for us by living this life. We are to live righteously so that we can redeem the time. The limited days we have must be exchanged for value. Just as God sent Christ in exchange for us, gives us value, the value of the days we live is made and comprised of what we give in that time. We are not afraid of the end of our story because we don't know the end date or the circumstances of it, but what we do know is who wrote it. And you don't have to be scared of a story when you know the author. Our life is not meant to be contained and limited and lived in fear. God liberating us from sin and death through Christ has meant to give us freedom. Freedom not to do as we please or live a hedonistic lifestyle, but freedom to live within the righteous confines of His law and to pursue a radical lifestyle of reaching others for Jesus. That is what we're called to do because we know the end of the story. This morning, my challenge to you is to adjust your framework. Change your perspective. I admire those who find living righteously to come easy because I know it doesn't for me. It's a daily challenge to avoid the temptations of life, to avoid the sin that Satan places in front of us to trip us up. And I work hard to avoid that, and I think all of us do, even knowing that sometimes we will fail, but being grateful for the blood of Christ that cleanses us for all time and redeems us. But rather than a perspective of simply avoiding the bad to get the good, what if we adopt a perspective of reveling in the freedom that that knowledge provides us? To reach out to the unreachable, to speak to the unspeakable, to care for those that are hard to love and hard to care for. That's what we're called to do. That's how we're called to use our time. That's what Paul is calling us to do in redeeming that time, making the most of every day. Not because we're unafraid of death, but because we're not afraid of this life. We have been redeemed. And it is our job to redeem this world in how we use our time. And maybe you need to adjust that perspective. Maybe you need to twist that framework and change that framework and find new opportunities. Maybe you've been spiritually napping and you're ready to wake up and be active and live a fearless, radical life. If you need to be restored in that way, then we want to pray for you and encourage you. But maybe you live in fear because you don't know the glory of the blood of Jesus Christ. And if you're living in fear today, the message is this: you don't have to be afraid anymore. You can live in the freedom because you have permission to be radical in Jesus Christ. You have permission to go a little crazy in how you live the rest of whatever days you have left on this earth. And that's found in the blood of Christ, and that's found in the waters of baptism. And if that's a need you have this morning, to give your life to Him, to be redeemed, to know your value. Your value is what someone is willing to pay. And Jesus paid it all. If you're ready to accept your value in Him this morning, if you're ready to walk a new life of freedom and liberty, if you're ready to walk a new life of service to others, of care for others, of spreading the gospel, an evangelistic lifestyle that to the world is going to seem radical, but to us is simply what we've been called to, then this morning that call is for you, to accept Him, to embrace it, to be joined with Christ in baptism. If you have that need this morning, won't you do so as we stand and while we sing?
What can wash away? And make me whole again, nothing but the blood of Jesus.